Hi there, Salena Kulkarni here with another episode of the Alternative Investing Podcast. My mission is to help business owners build high-performance wealth that delivers reliable, predictable cash flow through unconventional strategies so they can fast-track their path to financial freedom. Each week I share with you the strategies, expert interviews, and real people's stories around the topic of wealth and financial freedom. And if you're a business owner who wants to learn more about financial freedom through alternative methods, please head over to my website, freedomwarrior.com.au, where you can access my library of articles, interviews, and programs to help you on your way to becoming more financially free. All right, guys, I'm super excited about today's interview. It is with someone I've only met very recently, but I have known of by reputation for a number of years, and his name is James Schramko. What I can tell you about what I knew about James is he is definitely an enigmatic character, a little bit mysterious, don't know a lot about his personality, definitely known for being one of the smartest cats in business, both here in Australia and globally. Super creative. And, his book, Work Less, Make More, kind of sums him up to some degree. He is definitely a guy who places a high value on work-life balance. And in this fantastic, insightful episode, James really unpacks for us his views on financial success, wealth, investing, money, and so much more. He's definitely an interesting guy, an old school gen, and I hope you really enjoy some of the pearls of wisdom he shares. James Schramko, so awesome to have you on the Freedom Warrior podcast today. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
So look, I generally like to start right at the beginning because I think it gives us a good foundation for understanding a bit about you, who you are, and your journey. I don't know much about your background and your family, but I would love to get an insight into how money showed up in your home growing up. Like, was it talked about? What did it mean to you? And how did it influence you during your teen years?
If I were to summarize it, I'd say we grew up pretty wealthy. Actually, I was born in Melbourne. We lived there till I was about 5. My dad was a high-ranking manager in a transport company at the time. He came from Sydney, so he was recruited for that role where I was born. We lived in 2 houses when we were in Victoria, and both in good suburbs. Like the last place I lived was called Brighton, and that's an affluent suburb. First place was Frankston, and that was sort of a bit edgy. But when we came back to Sydney, we rented a place in Manly in a unit right near the beach, and then they found a place to live in Balmoral Beach in Mossman, which is in the top few wealthiest suburbs of Sydney. We lived 2 streets back from the beach, and then they found another place just up around the hill. And my dad was very interested in renovating motor vehicles, so he needed more land, and they got a bigger place in a sort of more out of the way area. It was pretty much the last residential house in what then became the Navy and the Army zone on Middlehead. And so I grew up in a big house in Mossman.
Wow.
I went to a private school, and we had a nice car. We had a Jaguar. I didn't really understand then about things like mortgages or car finance or whatever, but just from outward appearance, my dad had a high-paid job. We had good things. We never went without stuff. We weren't having that conversation about we can't afford this or whatever. I guess, when I reflect on how I was brought up, I think my parents did a really good job of giving me a good life. And my mum did work initially as a volunteer, and then she got paid to do it for charities like Red Cross and the Smith family. So she would be doing that when I got home from school, and then she'd come home. So they were both working for a while there, but there's definitely had a silver spoon in the mouth at that stage of life. There was no doubt about it. I thought we were rich. In fact, I really thought that I would just get an inheritance, and I was probably quite lazy as a result of that.
So let me go a bit deeper there, because definitely growing up with money can be a double-edged sword. It can either sort of spur you on and you can take great lessons from it if it's spoken about in a healthy way, or the opposite is it's not spoken about at all. Ultimately, when you go into the real world, that stuff is what shows up. How do you think your upbringing kind of then shaped your views of money later in life?
I mean, obviously massively.
Was it a fall from grace?
Yeah, we had the recession came in early 90s. So that was a massive slap in the face. Short version is we went from I had a good upbringing, went to a nice school. I underachieved. I didn't even pass my HSC. I think I got 220. I also had a learning difficulty. Apparently I was what you'd call a Ritalin kid. So I wasn't paying attention, but it didn't really matter. And I was probably one of the less wealthy kids at the school I went to. I went to Shaw School. So I was there with all the stockbrokers and lawyers and doctors' kids.
Okay.
Naughty little brats, boys' school. I hated school, by the way. But after school, I enrolled for the only thing I could actually get into in university was food technology. And I didn't want to learn how to make peanut butter. So I decided to do accounting at TAFE and associate diploma course. They do a 2-year course. And I started that, and then I got glandular fever, and I had to quit that, and did all sorts of odd jobs. I worked in an accountant's on Fridays. I worked in a timber yard. I was a landscaper. I did a lawn mowing round. So I started my own business at that point and got lots of experience working for different people. But around this time, this is about 1989, and then I started again in 1990. I re-enrolled in the accounting course. I started then. I did a year of that. And then in 1991, halfway through the year, we pretty much ran out of money. My father was made redundant from a developing company that he was with. He had to hand back the car, which I think was out of equity, and it basically owed more than it was worth. They had to sell up the house in Mossman, and I actually moved out before them. I went to live in the backyard at my grandfather's place in Cremorne. So he had a shed. We knocked it down and we built a little 1-bedroom with bathroom apartment in his backyard. It wasn't like disastrous. It was kind of newish, but small. And it was a little bit interesting being sort of living away from home at that age. And then they sold the house and came and lived in the back of his house. So now it was my sister, myself, my parents all living at my grandparents' place, my grandfather, my grandmother had passed away by now. And we basically went from having everything to having not much at all. And I actually quit study and got a job in debt collection. So my first full-time office job after accounting, in 1991, I was 20 years old, was as a telephone debt collector. And that's when my education really took on a whole new dimension, because we just accelerated into this recession in Australia. And I got to see the other side of the coin, the people who were scraping by to make their payments. And then I watched my parents, go through some pretty difficult times, having to readjust. And there was a few iterations there as well. But I learned a lot from that, from going from having a good upbringing to then having to become independent in a way. And it wasn't long after that I actually moved out and started my life, independently and started having kids and all that. I was married by 23 and I had my first kid at 24. So
Wow.
I was really on the, need to earn money train for at least a decade or two.
Wow. So that was a pretty serious fracture in your life at a very young age. And it sounds like it would have been a very challenging 5-year block in general. What were the big lessons around money at that time? Or was there, because that's not a small shift you had to make. What were the big takeaways?
Well, just an influx in responsibility. I went from complacency and entitlement to responsible and accountable. It was basically game on. I didn't have a safety net anymore, and I felt a lot of pressure. So if I look back at my younger self, I was under an enormous amount of pressure for I would say even up until probably 5 years ago, I still carried trauma from that pressure that was there. And at the time, this is pre-internet. So, the internet really I only became aware of the internet about 1995. And I only got online for my own business in 2006, 2005. So, this is pre-internet. It wasn't as easy for me to see ways out of that. I really felt like I was locked in and I didn't have a choice but to just earn the most I possibly could. So I navigated through my first job, my wage was $18,500 per year. And then I worked my way up through the corporate ladders. And each level I got to, I took on more learning. I took on more responsibility. I reflected and benchmarked against peers. But I realized, when I went to my 10-year school reunion, I definitely had like the most kids, one of the earliest marriages, and I was reasonably doing okay in my peer group. And then at the 20-year mark, I was virtually retired, like from the
wow.
the corporate world. So, my graduation year was 1988. By 1998, I was doing okay in 98. I had a pretty senior role. And by 2008, I'd already quit my job. So it was a big, I packed a lot of years into every year. I always think of it like dog years. I really feel like if you're on the telephone debt collecting, or if you're out in the field repossessing cars like I did, or you're selling for a living where every month starts at zero, you really have to pack a lot in. So I've had a compressed education in the field.
Yeah, wow. That is such a great story. What I'd love to ask you is, what age do you think you were at when you felt you made the transition from survival to I'm going to be okay and there's wealth to back me up? Like, how old were you?
Probably 45.
Okay.
I guess I would be reasonably conservative because I've been through the recession. I've been through the big economic fallout that happened 10 years ago, 2009, was it? Around about then. So, and then we've seen a pandemic. So I've seen it 3 times now, hardships, hard times. And a lot of the people I work with, or younger people, haven't really seen it or been exposed to it. So I guess I would like to build up a bigger armory or bank before I would, declare that I feel like I'm okay now. At the age I'm at now, I'm working a lot more on things that I wasn't focused on when I was younger, like health, longevity, eating quality foods, moving a lot more. I really feel like I could live a lot longer than what I might have thought I could live. And each decade that goes past, maybe the technology will improve. So I also expand the timeline as to how long I would want to have reserves for.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. That's really great. And look, I guess the extension of all of this is, you've obviously, as you said, gleaned a lot of wisdom in the time that you've been not only running your own businesses, but doing the hard yards on the phone and probably doing the shit jobs that not many people want to do. You are probably looked at from the outside now as someone who finds it easy to make money. I guess I'm trying to, elicit from you, would you agree that building wealth and earning money are 2 separate disciplines? And what's your philosophy and worldview on that?
Well, it is easy for me to make money now because I've got the experience and wisdom and resources and momentum that I can work with. I can go out and I can make money straight away. I could send out an email to my audience and make an offer and bring in money. I could create a relationship with a partner who will see what I've done and want to work with me. So it basically gets easier. That game gets easier the longer you play it. I think back to some advice I got from my uncle, who at the time was an advisor to Paul Keating, who was the Prime Minister of Australia. And he's an economics genius, my uncle. He sat on the Reserve Board of Australia, and he's
wow.
He used to be the Washington correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald. So very wise man. He taught me, when I was really young, he said, just work on your ability to make income because you can easily build assets and wealth if you have a high income. And so I put more energy into getting better roles and getting paid more at the time, and not so much worried about, I knew friends who worked for, and I do still have a friend, he's the exact same age as me, and he's worked for Sydney City Electricity for like 35 years or something. He's been there since he was 15 years old.
Wow.
One job he's ever had. He's had one, and it's the only guy I know that's had one job. The longest person in a job that I know. He was talking to me about his peers at work who, they have low incomes, but they invest in properties and so forth. And, they were doing a very smart strategy early, but they never focused on creating a high income. Whereas I probably in the earlier years, I focused more on just having income capacity, because if you have income capacity, you can quickly demolish debt. You can start from scratch again if you need to, and hopefully you never have to. And then I focused a lot on diversifying the way that I earn income. Obviously having a job was a massive point of failure that almost everyone has, and I needed to get out of that situation. So in 2008, when I left my employer and started my own, I'd already started my own business, but when I went into that dedicated myself to it. My mission was to get paid by lots of different people from different markets in different currencies doing different business models. I wanted some diversification within the specialty that I had so that I never have to worry about it collapsing. And I brought to the online world this philosophy of own the race course, which is really just a code name for control what you possibly can. So my philosophy is I'm making the most money I've ever made now because that's when I have the benefit of all my experience and my contacts, my resources, my knowledge. I've already tried lots of things. I've seen what works for me. I know more about me and my investing style and tolerances and my strategies. So I'm in the prime zone. I've seen research too, and you probably know much more about this than I do, where the bulk of your wealth is created sort of later on in your career. So I would say I'm happy with the strategy I had for me, which was just to be really good at what I was doing and to get myself in a more bankable position for later. And that's when you can really hit the gas. So I'm in a fortunate situation now where I can really control how much I want to invest in terms of my time. And I've sort of been able to flick the switch from in the early days, really obsessing about making a lot of money to now spending as much time, if not more, on how I'm investing the money that I'm making rather than just making the money. Because the making money part's actually much easier now. It's the investing it for good leverage and returns and for the long haul that has a better yield. Like obviously I could get a 100% return on my investment if I do something clever now. It's much harder to double the income you have from your business. Well, it's certainly hard for an employee. It's not as hard for a business owner, but still it's easier if you can do it on paper or in a transaction rather than have to do actual work. So one thing that's very important and that I teach my own customers is it's really good to separate this time and money equation, separate them apart and get off this idea that the only way you can make money is by giving up time and that the only way you can make money is by working hard. I've found that it's not true.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. So much wisdom. I think the follow-on question I have from all of that is, from your perspective, how much is enough? That is such a personal and debatable question. But you're very much the guy, the work less, make more.
I am.
At what point did you go, well, I'm prepared to make those compromises on income and design the life I love? For you, what's enough?
For me, enough is just pretty much a simple formula. It's like, if I stop doing everything now, could I live out the rest of my years without having to actually do any active work? That would be the number. Now, I'm not #van life. I'm not living in a van on a budget. I'm not an expat living in a foreign country. Well, not most of the time. Like usually I spend at least 3 months of the year outside Australia, somewhere else, but not at the moment. So I do have, and I've got lots of kids too, and kids do have sort of this responsibility attached to them. At least I've found for probably about
I don't
20.
think you're alone.
Yeah. And like I do muse sometimes at the advice espoused by 20-something-year-olds, in their books on how to create a wealthy life. And I'm like, what do you know about life? It's great for 20-something-year-old guys in a Western culture. Like it's hard to go wrong, really. I'm not prepared to, or I'd rather not have to couch surf my way around to exist. So I have a minimum criteria of what my lifestyle and my routine looks like. The way I live now, clearly I'm doing the golden rule, which is my cost of living is way, way less than what I actually bring in. And that's an equation that most of the public still have around the wrong way, I suspect.
Yep.
So that's step one. If you can at least spend less than you earn in the way you live, that's at least good for now. But then you can extrapolate that out, and like with the surplus, can you put that to work so that it's working for you in a way that it could deliver you a consistent income for the rest of your time? I'm not that worried about legacy, but that's started to become more of an interest because, I think you go through phases. Firstly, it's survival and selfish requirement to make money. A lot of people never get past that requirement to make money, and you see it in the behavior of online marketers, especially. Then you go through to the phase where you actually set up okay for yourself and you're starting to play with things that you didn't have an interest in before, like health, relationships, actually spending time doing things you're interested in, interests. And then the next phase, I think, is what happens after I pass, where does that money go to? And there's a funny story in my sort of family history where my great-grandfather was incredibly wealthy. He was one of the members of the Sydney Stock Exchange. He owned acreage in Gordon, which is an exclusive suburb of Sydney. He had gold and silver mines all around the world. He used to travel and journal. He went to Russia and Africa and the UK, and where he was born actually, and the USA. He would buy land in Russia and sell it in America. So he was doing arbitrage, like geo arbitrage. He was syndicating. He was getting people to invest in iron ore mines, and then he would float them on the stock exchange and sell them. So he had all this wealth, but then after several generations, it kind of dwindled away to nothing, because in his will was something about it being in some non-interest bearing account, and then it all got contested and then split up, and everyone, all multi-generations down, got a little bit, and then it was nothing. So I thought that was an interesting and valuable lesson for me, is you do have to give some thought to the next stage, especially if you do, potentially life-threatening activities and so forth. Like in some countries, that's just existing. And in Australia, things like water sports and so forth, there is always that chance that you might not come back at the end of the day. And you have to think about what would happen. So I do think it's important, if you've got kids especially, to have things like a will. And, I'm not a financial advisor or anything, but these are just the basics that, again, I think people just overlook because they're busy or whatever and haven't given it much thought.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm not a financial planner either, but, a lot of this stuff around legacy and wealth management is, as you said, it's mostly common sense. I know, I just want to shift gears a tiny bit, because so much of what you've just said is so valuable. And from a business coaching point of view, what you are known for, or what I've heard about you, is you're great at keeping it simple when it comes to business. Has this also been true of your approach to investing? Do you subscribe to the keep it simple? What assets do you believe in outside of business?
Well, I do like business as an asset. I mean, I've sold my own businesses a couple of times, and it's one of the most thrilling things to do. Partly from the artist perspective of actually having an idea and creating it, and then someone seeing value in that, it's quite flattering actually. But beyond that, it's just like, it is amazing that you can create something of value and sell it. So I do like business, but I've thankfully got a business model that doesn't really require investment, like financial investment. And I've really forged ahead with a business model that is so elegantly simple, where I help grow other people's businesses for a percentage of revenue as a royalty or a licensing fee. So again, I don't have to put any capital in. So yeah, the money has to go somewhere. Earlier on, I tried some more sophisticated things. I started with a very conservative accountant, and he said, go and buy a 5-pack of blue chip shares and take out a personal loan to buy them, and then just pay the loan off and we'll tax deduct that. It was like a really straightforward strategy. Then I had a more risky financial planner / accountant, and he was too edgy. We did things like buy residential unit properties, in certain areas, Queensland, et cetera, and depreciate those and tax them. But then he was into things like forestry schemes and wine and grape schemes. They all came undone, ended up getting audited. I think he got sentenced recently for fraud and misappropriating funds. Like, I could tell he was going to go off the reservation at some point, and I bailed out from him a long time ago. So he was too edgy, and ended up with my Goldilocks style accountant, who's just right. He's not the cardigan wearing Toyota driver, and he's not a fancy flary sort of SL driver with a butler. He's right there in the middle. He's one of those quiet achievers you talk about on your about page. He's set himself up very well with his investment portfolios. He understands the rules and regulations and has some strategies around it. And there's a certain limit to what you can and can't do in terms of building wealth. And my core stance is, I'd actually rather pay a little bit of tax and do everything by the book and keep it fairly simple, and know that I can sleep at night and never have recourse or concern that one day down the track I'll get a knock on the door, or that the whole thing could come undone. And it's kind of a question almost everyone I deal with at my level is asking, how can you set this up or do that? Everyone's looking for the shortcut or the angle, and I think you have to be careful. So I am fairly simple. I do invest in different asset classes. So I like property, but I'm not passionately in a love affair with property. I've found it a bit grinding, doing the whole, when you make it all unemotional and it's just a thing there on paper and you get a pretty small percentage yield in some cases, and you have to replace stuff like the cookware or whatever. Like, some of it was just a pain in the ass, even with a managed agent and all of that. And sometimes I didn't feel like it was the greatest use of my energy. I'm better off to invest in other things in some cases, where I'm either more interested in it or it can get a better return for me. So I've actually enjoyed educating myself in some different areas. So I train trained myself in the mindset around Forex trading, for example. I'm not a big time Forex trader, but I learned so much about me when I Forex trade, the way that I trade, my strategies around trading. And even though I do it on a small scale, it gave me the muscle that I needed to take advantage of things like 2020, because I was able to be very active with Australian shares and with the US share market, because there's been so much movement. It gave me an opportunity. And you often hear about or read about, a lot of fortunes are made in the downtimes. I'd have to say, in my case, it was a perfect environment for me to work in areas where I can get a substantial return doing active things where I'd normally be passive. And at this stage of the timing cycle, I've pretty much pulled a lot of my chips back off the table, because I went in there in April in 2020 and was able to convert what was cash at the time into shares, and then most of them doubled. And then I took it back out into cash. Things like using my superannuation, using some of the surplus funds from my business, I can park it in overseas share trading accounts. I developed a nice little method for myself on working with the technology stocks and pairing it with a hedge stock. And every time they went up and down, I was able to buy and sell off the peaks. And just working that system, I found that really fun. And it was, again, using the Forex muscle that I'd built up to be able to do my research, to place my limits, and then let it play out. And the best thing, it was all happening while I was asleep. So I'm not one of these people who wants to sit on a screen for 8 hours. I spend 2 or 3 minutes setting up my system, and then I'll let it go. But then I'm doing other things too. Yeah, I'm interested in what's going to happen with blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. And, it's still hard to tell, but certainly where things are at now, I'm really happy with how I've been able to manage around that. And I think one of the underlying themes that was kind of blind to me, that I've become much more aware of in at least the last 5 or 6 years, is that you often have a choice that you may not have realized exists. You can have a choice in your method of payment. You can have a choice in the entity that you operate with. You can have a choice in currencies where you put your money. You can have a choice with where you put it and when you take it out. So these things I've really enjoyed learning about and developing. Aside from having a small surfboard collection and other bits and pieces, I'm not doing like 100 different asset classes. I don't do postage stamps. I don't do artworks. I'm not doing anything super obscure. I haven't gone into, NFTs yet. I'm not the first person into a market. I wait until things settle down a bit, and then I'm probably in the early majority, and I usually cash out on the late majority, and I'm not around by the time it's a laggard zone.
I love it. Like, there's just so much gold in everything you've just shared, but I think is apparent is you've reached that stage of your life as a business owner and investor where you get the play of money.
Yes.
There's a lot of player, and it can be super fun, which is, I think that is really the ultimate goal of this stage of life, really. I'd love to finish off with one last question. We're in I won't say post-COVID world, but we're in a world where the shock of something like COVID has subsided. What is your wisdom or final pearl of kind of thought that you would give to business owners who are floundering to find the time or feel overwhelmed about building wealth?
I actually think we might be in a small stasis period. So I think this is the time to get your stuff sorted out. I think in the timeline of the roller coaster, I really feel like the pandemic took people out from the side, totally unexpected for many. I mean, I've literally been preparing for that event for 10 years.
Wow.
And almost every one of my clients had an exceptional year in 2020 because they were ready. And I work with online businesses. So, I mean, that category in general went quite well. But what we have seen, is like people are adjusting, but then there was this artificial support of payments and handouts and so forth. And I think now we're starting to see like people are starting to sort of, travel agents and with vaccinations and with immigration and so forth. People are just sort of exploring to see if it's safe to come out yet. And then in some cases there's breakouts or relapses, and they've said, no, it's still not quite right. And then other people are saying, you know what, I don't want to go back to live events. I don't want to go back to a physical in-person business now. I think the market has moved and it will not snap back to the way it was before. So I would say we're in a new normal. And I think I'm really going out there on a limb here, but I do feel like my own position at the moment, with like record sales of properties and so forth. Like in the last month was the biggest month of growth in the property market for ages. And even since December, it's gone up a massive amount. It seems a little unrealistic because we haven't had the low tide mark yet. We don't know what happens when all the stimulus stops and when the businesses that shouldn't be functioning actually go out of business, and when inflation starts to happen. We might see a change in the landscape. And obviously I lived the environment of when my parents' interest rate was like 21% in 1988 or 1989. It just got out of control. So let's see what happens. I'm taking a conservative position right now because I feel like by the end of this year, a lot could move. But certainly in the next few months, I think it's going to be pretty stable. I reckon you got 1 quarter or 3 months to sort stuff out, and then the game will change again. That's just what I think is going to happen. And then, of course, in 2022, we really might start seeing things open up a little bit more, and when it's game on for traditional industries, like when cruise liners happen again and all that sort of stuff, it'll be very interesting to see if people make up for lost time and, if they've built up a big appetite and live events and conferences and all that stuff we might go back to a little more of what it used to be before. But I really think we're in for several changes. But I think right now is a flat spot, and then comes change at the end of the year. And of course, we're going to have a big seasonal change around September again for all the countries. As Australia goes out of winter and other countries go into winter, often there's, that's the time of spring cleaning and auctions and all that stuff. I think we'll see a few different seasons over the rest of the year.
Love, love, love that. James, I really want to thank you for doing this interview. I know you don't do many interviews, and I'm super grateful that you've shared all this wisdom. It's really interesting to find out the man behind the brand sometimes. And I really acknowledge that you've really, opened up and shared some personal things today. So thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, Salena. And I wouldn't change any of it either. Like everything had to happen for me to be in the position I'm in now. But I will say this, whatever life looks like right now, my experience has been that within 10 years from now, pretty much every single aspect of your life could be completely different. Every aspect of it, from what business you're doing, where you live, who you're hanging out with. Obviously, if you've got kids, they'll be 10 years older. It seems like a long time, 10 years, but it can sort of sneak up on you. And I would say I've especially with the people I work with, I do see a lot of people have such significant transformations they wouldn't even recognize their previous version of themselves. So hopefully it would be encouraging to someone who's not feeling like they're in the perfect zone right now. And I know it's kind of irritating to listen to people like me talking about how good things are, but I certainly went through very difficult situations to get there, whether it's people pulling a shotgun on me or not knowing how I'm going to pay the next credit card bill. When I'm a early 20s father, it was very stressful. So like it is what it is, and I hope there's some takeaway at least in our discussion that could help somebody.
Absolutely. I love it. And I have a funny feeling that people are going to be clamoring for a part 2 on this one. So I'll have to beg you for another session.
Oh, you don't have to bring it on. Just, send in your questions.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, James.
All right. Thanks, Salena.
Thanks so much for listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're a business owner feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head over to freedomwarrior.com.au to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. Till next time, take care. See you on the next episode, and bye for now.